I remember the exact moment I understood what she had done. My phone was face down on the kitchen counter. My husband Daniel was on his knees on the kitchen floor building a Lego castle with our daughter Maya, who was 5 years old, and had been our daughter in every way that mattered for 11 months and would be our daughter in every legal way in 24 hours. The castle was lopsided. Maya kept laughing at it. Daniel kept rebuilding the same tower, and it kept falling, and she thought this was the funniest thing that had ever happened. I was making dinner. I was happy. And then my phone buzzed, and I turned it over, and I read the email from our adoption attorney, and the happiness drained out of me so completely that Daniel looked up from the floor and said what happened. I could not speak for a moment. I said she filed. He said what? I said your mother filed a legal petition to block the adoption. Tomorrow. She filed it today. Daniel put down the Lego piece in his hand and looked at me for a long time. Then he said, what time is the hearing? I said 9 in the morning. He said we have 18 hours. I said yes. He said then let's use them. That was Daniel. That has always been Daniel. Not hot fury. Cold focus. I married the right person. My name is Claire. I am 36. Daniel is 38. Our daughter Maya is now 7. She has Daniel's laugh and my stubbornness and no biological connection to either of us. And she is the most ours thing either of us has ever had. This is the story of the 24 hours that almost took her from us, and the 18 months that came after. Let me tell you who Margaret is first, because you need to understand what we were dealing with before you can understand what she did. Margaret is 67. She is Daniel's mother, and she has been widowed for 9 years, and in those 9 years she has reorganized her entire life around her son and the expectation that he would eventually produce biological grandchildren who would carry the family name into the next generation. She never said this directly. She said it in sideways sentences. She said things like, I hope when you have children they have your eyes and Daniel's height. She said things like the strong jaw runs on our side. It would be lovely to see it again. She said things like I sometimes look at old photos of Daniel as a baby and think one day. She said all of these things for the 8 years Daniel and I were together. And then for the 3 years we spent trying to have biological children. And then for the 2 years we spent deciding adoption was our path. She did not say them in front of us after we told her our decision. She said them in the particular silence of someone who has decided to wait. I noticed the silence. I said nothing. Daniel told his mother we were adopting. She said that was a loving thing to do. She said she hoped we knew what we were taking on. Daniel said we were prepared. She said she was sure we were. She asked if we had thought about international versus domestic. Daniel said we were pursuing domestic infant adoption. She said that was probably better given attachment research. She said she was supportive. She was not supportive. She was calculating. I know this now. I knew something like it then. I watched her face when we talked about Maya. The way she processed information about a child who did not share our genetics. She was kind to Maya when she met her. She held her and played with her, and brought her age-appropriate gifts. She learned Maya's favorite color, and her favorite book. She did all the right things on the surface. Under the surface she was talking to a lawyer. She had been talking to a lawyer for 6 months before she filed. We found this out later. 6 months of preparation. 6 months of building a legal argument against our daughter. I want you to sit with that for a moment. 6 months. While she was coming to our home and making pancakes with Maya on Sunday mornings and reading her bedtime stories, and calling herself Grandma Margaret. 6 months of that. And underneath it, a lawyer. The petition cited 2 grounds. The first was that Daniel and I had not been fully transparent with the adoption agency about what she called our domestic circumstances. This was not true. We had been entirely transparent. The second was that she, as the paternal grandmother, had standing to petition against the adoption on the grounds that it was not in the best interest of the family unit. This was a creative legal argument that our attorney, Ms. Walsh, described to us at 11:30 on the night before the hearing as thin but not frivolous enough to dismiss without a hearing. We sat at the kitchen table with Miss Walsh on the phone and Daniel's laptop open, and Maya asleep in the next room, with the Lego castle still lopsided on her bedroom floor, and we built our response in the remaining hours. We had everything. We had Maya's placement records. We had the agency's full documentation. We had 18 months of pediatric visit records, school reports, photographs, teacher testimonials, and a letter from Maya's therapist who had been working with her since placement. We had a letter from the birth mother who had chosen us specifically, and who had written, in her own words, that she had chosen Daniel and me because she believed we would love her daughter without conditions and without qualification. We printed that letter at 1 a.m. I folded it and put it in the folder, and I sat at the table for a moment, and I thought about a woman I had never met who had made the most painful decision of her life and had trusted us with the result of it. I thought about what it would mean if Margaret won, what it would mean for Maya, what it would mean for the birth mother who had placed her trust in us. I did not allow myself to cry. I went to bed at 2. I lay next to Daniel in the dark, and he held my hand, and neither of us slept. At 5, I got up and made coffee. At 6, Maya came padding down the hallway in her pajamas with the lopsided Lego tower in her hands. She said it fell again in the night, Mama. I said, let me see. She handed it to me. I looked at it. I said, I think the base is too narrow. Let me show you something. We sat on the kitchen floor together, and I showed her how to widen the base so the tower could hold. She tried it. It held. She shrieked with pride. She said, Mama, it works. I said, yes, baby, it works. Daniel came in and found us on the floor, and he looked at the tower, and then at me, and something passed between us that did not need words. We are going to fight. We are going to win. We are not going to let anyone take this. The hearing was at 9. We arrived at 8:40. Miss Walsh was already there. Margaret arrived with her lawyer at 8:55. She wore a navy blazer and a small gold brooch that I later understood had been Daniel's grandmother's and that she wore when she wanted to signal family claim. She did not look at me. She looked at Daniel. She looked at him with an expression that said, this is still correctable. Turn around. Come back to the version of our family I had imagined. Daniel looked straight ahead. The judge was the Honorable Justice Chun. She was in her 50s, and she read every document in front of her before either lawyer spoke. Margaret's lawyer presented the petition. He was articulate and careful, and he talked about family stability and the importance of biological connection and the grandmother's existing relationship with the child. I watched Judge Chun's face while he spoke. She wrote something down. Then Miss Walsh presented our response. She presented Maya's records. She presented the placement documentation. She presented the letter from Maya's birth mother. She presented the pediatric records and the teacher letter and the therapist assessment. She presented an 18-month timeline of Maya's life with us in this family. Documented, verified, and unambiguous. Margaret's lawyer tried to raise the transparency concern. Judge Chen said, show me the specific disclosure they failed to make. He named a circumstance. Ms. Walsh showed the document in which we had fully disclosed it. Judge Chen made a note. Then Judge Chen looked at Margaret's lawyer and said this. I am going to ask you one question. Is there any evidence before this court that this child is not thriving, that she is not safe, that she is not loved, or that the adoption proceeding has been conducted improperly? Margaret's lawyer paused. He said there was not direct evidence of harm. Judge Chen said, then what I have before me is a petition filed by a third party whose stated concern is not the child's welfare, but the family's biological composition. She paused. She said that is not a legal basis for blocking an adoption there has been conducted properly, and that serves the best interest of the child. She denied the petition. She denied it in 14 minutes. 14 minutes from the moment she finished reading to the moment she said the petition is denied. I was sitting very still, and I was holding Daniel's hand under the table, and when she said the petition is denied, I felt Daniel's hand tighten around mine so hard it hurt. I did not say anything. I held on. We walked out of the courthouse into the September morning, and the sun was doing the thing it does in September where it is warm, but the air underneath, it is already turning cold, and I stood on the steps and I breathed it in, and Daniel put his arm around me and I said, "Is it done?" He said, "It is done." I said, "We need to pick up Maya from school at 3. He said, "I know." I said, "Can we get coffee first?" He said, "Yes." We sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse, and we drank our coffee, and we did not talk about Margaret. We talked about Maya's birthday, which was in 6 weeks, and whether she wanted a castle theme or a dinosaur theme, and whether the two could be combined into a castle dinosaur party, and what that would even look like. We talked for an hour. Then we picked up our daughter from school. She ran out of the building and threw herself at Daniel and said, "Daddy, the tower is still standing." He said, "I know." She said, "Mama told me how to do the base." He said she did. She said, "Yes. She knows everything." He looked at me over her head. I looked back. That was the day. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. What came after was quieter, but just as necessary. We engaged a family lawyer to draft and serve Margaret with a formal no-contact notice, not a permanent one, a conditional one. The conditions were these. She would formally withdraw any interest in pursuing legal action regarding Maya's status as our daughter. She would acknowledge in writing that Maya was our daughter and a full member of our family. She would agree to a supervised visit arrangement for any future contact with Maya that required both our consent and Maya's willingness. She would not discuss Maya's adoption with extended family members in terms that cast doubt on her belonging. Margaret received the notice through her lawyer. She did not respond for 3 weeks. Then her lawyer sent a response that said she was willing to accept the conditions. She signed the acknowledgement. The language of it was formal and stiff, and it read like every word had been dragged out of her. I framed it in my mind differently. I read it as a document that said in legal language what her conduct had prevented her from saying in plain words. Maya is Daniel and Claire's daughter. Full stop. Maya is now 7. She knows she was adopted. We told her in the way child psychologists recommend. Early and warmly and without drama. So that it was simply part of her story and not a revelation. She knows she grew in another woman's belly and in our hearts at the same time. She knows that more people chose her than most children get. She knows that there was a woman who loved her enough to give her the best life she could, and 2 parents who loved her enough to build the best base they knew how, so the tower could hold. She does not know about the hearing. She will know one day. When she is old enough, I will tell her. I will tell her that someone tried to say she did not belong, and that in 14 minutes, a judge said she did, and that her father held my hand so hard it left marks, and that afterward we drank coffee and planned her birthday party. I will tell her that belonging is not biology. It is the people who show up for you in the dark and rebuild the base when the tower falls. She will understand that. She already does. She shows me every time she hands me a crooked Lego tower and trusts me to know what to do with it. There are things about that night, the 18-hour night, that I have never told anyone except Daniel and our therapist. Let me tell you one of them. At midnight, when Ms. Walsh was still on the phone, and we were still building the response, and I was printing the birth mother's letter at the kitchen table, I walked to Maya's room. I did not intend to wake her. I just needed to look at her. I stood in the doorway and she was asleep on her side with her arm wrapped around the stuffed rabbit she had been carrying since placement day. The rabbit was named Gerald. She had named him after a character in a book about a crocodile who wanted to be a hero. She had renamed the rabbit Gerald the Heroic on the day she decided the original name was not big enough for him. I stood in the doorway, and I looked at Maya and Gerald the Heroic and the lopsided Lego tower on the shelf that she had rebuilt before bed. And I thought about Margaret. I thought about 6 months. 6 months of Sunday pancakes and bedtime stories and Grandma Margaret, and underneath all of it a lawyer. I did not feel rage. I felt something colder. A kind of grief for the grandmother Maya deserved that Margaret had chosen not to be. A grief for what might have been possible if Margaret had looked at Maya the way I was looking at her, and simply seen a child. Just a child. Ours and wonderful and needing nothing from Margaret except to be loved. Margaret had not been able to see that. I do not know if she ever will. I turned off the hallway light and went back to the kitchen table and kept building the response. That was the moment I understood that what I was fighting for was not just the adoption. I was fighting for the world Maya would grow up in. The world where she is simply ours. No asterisk, no petition. No grandmother in a navy blazer with a gold family brooch trying to argue her into a different category. Just ours. I went to the hearing the next morning and sat in that courtroom, and I held that clarity the way I had held Daniel's hand. Tight, without letting go. It was enough. It was more than enough. The extended family response to what Margaret had done was fractured in the way extended family responses always are. Some people had known about the lawyer. Some people had not. Daniel's cousin Rachel texted him the week after the hearing and said she had found out what his mother had done. And she was appalled. And she wanted us to know that she had told Margaret directly at a family gathering that what she had done was a betrayal of our family, not a protection of it, and that she hoped we would know that not everyone in the family saw it the way Margaret did. Daniel texted back and said, "It matters that you said that." He meant it. It did matter. When you are in the middle of something like that, when the institution that is supposed to protect you from the world suddenly becomes one of the things the world is using against you, it matters enormously when people inside the institution stand and say this is wrong. Rachel stood and said it. We remember that. We have told Maya about Rachel. She knows that her Auntie Rachel is someone who stood up. Margaret has seen Maya 4 times in the 18 months since the hearing. Each time was at our home, with both of us present, for a maximum of 90 minutes. Each time Margaret has been on her best behavior in the specific way of someone who knows they are being watched and assessed and who very much does not want to lose what little access they have been permitted. She brings appropriate gifts. She compliments Maya's drawings. She does not raise the subject of adoption or biology, or the family name. She holds Maya's hand and reads to her and seems, in those 90 minutes, like the grandmother she could have been all along if she had made different choices. I watch her, and I feel something that is not quite forgiveness, but that is not hostility either. It is something more like watchfulness. The watchfulness of a person who has seen what is underneath, and who does not believe the surface has permanently replaced it. It may have. People change. Margaret is not incapable of change. But I am also not incapable of documentation. The binder is still there. The acknowledgement is still in it. The hearing transcript is in it. All of it is there. Not because I am waiting for her to fail. Because Maya deserves a mother who never has to scramble in the dark. She has one. She will always have one. I want to tell you something about the birth mother. Her name I will not share here, because it is not mine to share. That she reached out to us when Maya was 2 through the open adoption channel we had established. She sent a letter. It was 3 paragraphs long, and it was the most precisely written thing I have ever read. In the first paragraph, she said she thought about Maya every day, and that she hoped she was loved. In the second paragraph, she said she had seen photographs we had posted to the shared adoption profile, and that Maya looked happy in every one of them, and that this was all she had ever wanted. In the third paragraph, she said she was grateful to us in a way she did not have words for, and that she hoped we knew that what we had given Maya was not just a home, but the specific certainty that she had been chosen, and that being chosen is one of the most powerful things a person can know about themselves. I read that letter at the kitchen table, and I did not hold back the tears this time. I read it, and I thought about the hearing, and the petition and Judge Chun's 14 minutes and the birth mother's original letter that Ms. Walsh had presented. And I thought about the chain of people who had held Maya between the moment of her birth and the moment she handed me the lopsided tower and said, "Mama, she knows everything." Every person in that chain had chosen her, had fought for her, had stood up in a courthouse, or at a kitchen table, or at a family gathering, and said this child is worth standing up for. Margaret had stood in the courtroom trying to interrupt that chain, and the chain had held. It had held because it was built on the right foundation. Not biology, not name, not gold brooches and family legacy. Love, the stubborn, documented, fighting kind. The kind that gets up at 5 in the morning and fixes the base of the tower so it can hold. One last thing. 2 months after the hearing, I was putting Maya to bed, and she was stalling the way she always did. One more question. One more story. One more drink of water. And in the middle of one of those stalling questions, she said, "Mama, do all babies have a grandma?" I said, "Most babies have grandmas, yes." She said, "Do I have a grandma?" I said, "You have Grandma Margaret on Daddy's side, and Grandma Sue on my side." She said, "Grandma Sue is nice." I said, "She really is." She thought about this. Then she said, "Grandma Margaret is sometimes not sure where to look." I sat very still. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "When she looks at me, and then she looks away quickly like she is not sure. Like when you look at a present, and you are not sure if you should open it." I said, "How does that make you feel?" She said, "A little bit sad." I said, "I know, baby." She said, "Does she like me?" I said, "She loves you." I said, "Sometimes grown-ups have feelings that are complicated, and they do not always know how to put them in the right place, and that, when you see someone looking at you like that, it is not because there is anything wrong with you. It is because there is something they are working out inside themselves." She thought about this with the seriousness that 5-year-olds bring to serious things. Then she said, "Okay." Then she said, "Can Gerald sleep on the bookshelf tonight? Because he wants to guard the castle." I said, "Of course he can." I put Gerald the Heroic on the shelf next to the Lego castle. I turned off the light. I stood in the doorway, and I looked at her in the dark, and I thought, she is 7 kinds of perceptive, and she is 5 years old, and she is ours, and no one is going to take that. No Petition, no Lawyer, no navy blazer with a gold family brooch. No one. I closed the door. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of wine, and I texted Daniel, who was still at work. And I said, "Our daughter said, Margaret looks at her like she is not sure whether to open her." He texted back in approximately 8 seconds. He said, "What did you say?" I said it is not about her. He said, "Good." Then he sent 3 heart emojis, which is the maximum number of heart emojis Daniel has ever sent in a single text message. I counted them. I saved the text. I keep it in my phone under a folder called The Good Stuff. There is a lot in that folder now. It gets fuller every year. That is the whole story. That is all of it. Here is my question for you. If your mother-in-law hired a lawyer to block your adoption the night before the finalization hearing, would you cut contact completely or give her supervised access the way we did? In TAYTAESH or nah? I read every comment. Every single one. I want to tell you about the day Margaret signed the acknowledgement, because it did not happen the way I had imagined it in the weeks leading up to it. I had imagined something confrontational. Something with lawyers in a room and formal language, and a moment where she looked across a table and acknowledged in person what she had done. That is not what happened. What happened was a letter delivered to our door by her lawyer's courier on a Thursday afternoon in November. A thin envelope. 1 page inside. I opened it at the kitchen table while Maya was at preschool and Daniel was at work. I read it alone. The language was legal and formal. It said the undersigned acknowledged and agreed. It said she confirmed. It said she relinquished. It said all of the right things and all of the right legal formulations. At the bottom was her signature in her handwriting. I had seen her handwriting before. On birthday cards. On Christmas tags. On the small note she had tucked into the gift bag she brought the day we told her we were adopting. The gift bag with the book about what families look like, and how they are different, and the same. The gift bag I had thought then was a generous gesture, and had come to understand later was Margaret performing support she did not feel. I sat at the kitchen table and I held the page with her signature on it, and I thought about all of the Sunday pancakes and the bedtime stories and the 6 months of lawyer meetings underneath them, and I thought about Maya naming a rabbit Gerald the heroic, and handing me a lopsided tower at 5 in the morning, and I thought about Judge Chen and 14 minutes and the September sun that was warm at the top and cold at the base. I did not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that. I did not feel triumph when I read the acknowledgement. I felt something more like a long exhale, the kind you do not know you have been holding until it finally comes out. I put the letter in the binder. I texted Daniel. He came home early. We picked up Maya together. That evening we made the Lego castle bigger. Maya decided it needed a drawbridge. We did not have the right pieces, so we improvised with a flat plate and 2 small hinges. And it was terrible, and it was perfect. And Maya said it was the best drawbridge in the world. Daniel said it was probably better than most drawbridges. I said most drawbridges were built by people who had never met Maya. She thought this was enormously funny. She laughed the way she laughs, with her whole body, like laughing is something that happens to her, rather than something she does. I watched her laugh and I thought, this is what we fought for. Not the acknowledgement. Not the hearing. Not the 14 minutes or the binder or the conditions. This. The drawbridge that does not work, and the laugh that takes over her whole body, and the evening in the kitchen when nobody is going anywhere, and the tower is going to hold, this time because we finally got the base right. There is a version of this story where we had not documented everything, where we had relaxed into the assumption that because Margaret seemed supportive on the surface was all there was, where we had not kept records of her comments and her silences and the particular way she had of looking at Maya and looking away. In that version, when the petition arrived the night before the hearing, we would have had a loving family and a lot of emotion and nothing else to put in front of Judge Chen. Ms. Walsh told me this directly after the hearing. She said the documentation saved you. She said the birth mother's letter saved you. She said the 18 months of pediatric records and the therapist's assessment and the teacher's letter saved you. She said if you had walked in with nothing but your word against Margaret's word, the outcome might have been different. She said in family court when there is competing testimony, the documentation is the case. I have thought about that a great deal. About the people who are in situations like ours without the documentation, without the 18 months of careful record keeping, without the lawyer who knew what to compile and how to present it, who walk into hearings with love and no paper and face people with lawyers and arguments. I do not have a solution for that. I only have this story and this instruction. Document everything. From the first moment something feels wrong. From the first sideways sentence about biological eyes and family jaws. From the first time someone looks at your child and looks away quickly, like they are not sure if they should open the present. Document it. Date it. Save it. Build the file. You may never need it. I hope you never need it. But if you do need it, it will be the most important thing you have. The case is in the paper. The protection is in the paper. Our daughter is home because someone at 1 a.m. printed a letter and put it in a folder, and a judge in September read every word.